Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. During this session, students from various colleges and universities will have the opportunity to ask questions to our four panelists based on the previous session. Now, let me introduce you to our four panelists. First, we have Marjan Dean. Marjan is a managing director at EY responsible for developing strategic partnerships that transform go-to-market models. Prior to EY, Marjan worked for Microsoft and IBM, and she is also a member of the National Society of Black Engineers. Next, we have Lu Chen. Lu is a managing director at Boston Consulting Group. She also serves on the leadership teams of Women at BCG and Asian Diversity Network in BCG in North America. And she was also named Working Mother of the Year in 2019. Our third panelist is Bryony Walker. Bryony is the Director of Corporate Administration and Communications at Walker SCM. She started her career in public accounting in 2011 at BDO USA LLP and spent 2 years at Markham LLP as an audit supervisor before joining the family business in 2019. For our last panelist, we have Tarbilan Lafon. Tarbilan is the Associate Vice President of Commercial Procurement, Expense Management, and Fleet Operations, as well as the founder of Organon, where he leads the procurement and supplier management organization. So welcome panelists to the session. Now I will move on to the students' questions. The first question comes from Emily Katz from Rutgers University. Her question is, why is intentional allyship important to the supply chain industry? And I will invite Marjan Dean to answer this question.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the question. So I saw an interesting quote today by Simon Sinek, which I think most of us are familiar with, and I'll quote it because I still think it applies to allyship as it does mentorship. And it says, a mentor is not somebody who walks ahead of us and tells us how they did it. A mentor is someone who walks alongside us to guide us on what we can do. And so I certainly think that holds true for allyship. And I think really it's the only way that we're going to break down the systemic nature of what exists, not only in society around D&I, but also what exists and permeates in corporate America.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marjan. So the next question comes from Amanda Vishara, and we have the pleasure to have her join us today. So Amanda, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you all. My name is Amanda. I go to Purdue. I'm studying industrial engineering and graduating in May of 2022. So this question is for Bryony Walker. If you can share with us, how can young professionals lead in promoting intentional allyship initiatives within their organizations?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Amanda, for your question. So I would say young professionals can lead by example, starting with yourself and what you can do personally, and then building upon that throughout your organization. Taking the first step in reflecting on your own experiences and being aware of your relationship to privilege and marginalization is really key and important. And having an investment of your own emotional intelligence and ability to empathize, with others and their perspectives. It's important that young professionals realize not just to listen and be quick to respond, but active listening and practicing that, where you're listening and understanding and comprehending what a person or a marginalized group is telling you, and then assessing how you can act and how you can better assist them to get to the next step. Another way of doing that is being a mentor, whether formal or informal nature, or utilizing on an everyday basis inclusive language in everything that you do, so it becomes inherent and it's an example to others around you. Other ways that a young professional can lead is engaging in a company's employee resource groups, maybe attending different meetings so that you get to know different groups and you get to hear and understand their stories. and then taking it from that step and seeing how you can further assist them.
Thank you so much, Brittany. So our third question is from Romy Joseph, and his question is, what is the most difficult part about implementing intentional allyship? And I'll give Lou the chance to answer this question.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I think why is it difficult, at least for now, is because it's new. It should not have been new. It should have been there for a long time, but unfortunately, we're really starting to work at it, right? So when things are new, you basically need it to really be a holistic strategy, and you need everybody in the company to role model, as Brittany just mentioned, both at the senior level and junior level. Basically, everybody need to be treating that as a top priority. You need to have multiple initiatives to drive it. It's just not one project or program, per year, and we check the box. It has to be a portfolio of initiatives. And I think for me, at BCG, we obviously have those top-down leadership-driven initiatives, but I also find those grassroots initiatives super helpful, because those are really led by people who are experiencing some of those issues, both positive and negative, right? Getting folks together to actually share experience sometimes is much more powerful than a senior leader come in and give a lecture. So I think on that front, top down and grassroots would be important. And in the end of the day, I think it comes down to incentives. It's about incentivizing the right behavior, at the same time, making sure that you have consequences for the wrong ones, right? So I think it's actually pretty hard for some of the folks to confront messages or behaviors that should not be there. So having that safe environment where folks are ready and empowered to raise hand and raise those issues and have them resolved, and actually have that publicity for the organization to say, we don't tolerate those sort of things. So those are all, I would say, work in progress in various degrees across different organizations that makes things hard. But at the same time, it takes an army, right? So all of us have our work to do, and hopefully in a year or two, we should be more about how do we go from good to great versus asking the question, why is this so difficult?
Thank you so much, Lou. So for the next question, we have Edwin Amaya, who has joined us today as well, and we will give Tar the opportunity to answer Edwin's question. So Edwin, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Edwin Amaya. I go to Rutgers Business School in Newark. I'm a supply chain management major, and I'm graduating in May of 2022. So my question is, allyship is the practice for inclusion for the in-groups to help the out-groups. Is the ultimate goal to make all the out-groups in-groups now? And if so, how will we sustain the new out-groups within the new in-group status? Thank you.
Hey, Edwin, thank you. I hope you can hear me. It's a pleasure to join everyone today. Greetings as well. When I read this question, I had to think about it a few times, because to me, I went back to what inclusion really means, right? And other panelists have talked a lot about how we can become better allies and things like that. But if you think about allyship, or really inclusion, it means providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who would normally be excluded, right, or marginalized. What does this really mean? It means all employees then feel that they belong to the company, and that they have an opportunity to voice their opinions, and they don't feel excluded based on their identity, and they see themselves reflected in the company's values. The question is, what happens when you do this? Employees contribute more, right, from my view, and the company performs better. So I link it to the fact that there's an economic, benefit, end result to this, right? On the other side of the equation. If you think about a two-sided coin, one side of the coin is you have resources in the company that you're not tapping into from a talent perspective because they're being excluded, right? Even though they're on your payroll, even though you're paying them a salary. So your net productivity per person is low, right? If you think about the other side of the coin, where you're practicing allyship and inclusion, you actually now have everybody really coming to the table, doing their best because they feel that they belong, their voices are being heard. And these are the same people that you're paying anyway. So your productivity from a business perspective is much higher. So if you think about inclusion from that perspective, there is a net economic benefit, not just to the company, but even from a personal perspective with respect to the individuals feeling much appreciated and well cared for by the company. So the ultimate goal, in my view, is not to come back to the question, it's not to make out groups in groups. It is really to ensure that we're all providing equal access to opportunities and resources, which allows everybody to belong and to contribute their best as well. So I digress from that second part of the question around making the out groups in groups and who becomes the new out group, because ultimately the practice of allyship is really around driving inclusion so that all employees have equal access to the opportunities and resources so that we can all rise together, right? So that's how I see it. And I welcome the other panelists to chime in as well. But ultimately, I think that is a good measure of ensuring that we're practicing inclusion, which starts with allyship.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tar, for your discussion. And like he said, if anyone else of the panelists would like to chip in, their opinions, you can go ahead and do so. But for our next question, it comes from Danielle Castro, and is what is the level of interest within industry for companies to address systems that challenge their basic rights, equal access, or ability to thrive and become an intentional ally? And I will pass this question to Marjan.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is the level is high, right? And I think for everything that Tarvalon just walked through very eloquently, and just to address sort of some sustainability topics around that, because I think that was a question as well. I mean, from a corporate perspective, it makes good business sense. Not only is it the right thing to do, but it makes good business sense for all the reasons he just walked through. So I would tell you, the level is super high. I don't think I've ever seen, the interest of just wanting to understand, and I would say from privileged and advantaged levels of what am I not understanding, right? I don't have a perspective. Help educate me, right? And I don't think I've ever heard those types of words being said before. And so there is a deep sense, I think, of empathy that's being developed around what don't I understand. And so I think you're starting to see, tech corporations reach out to HBCUs and try to formulate those partnerships that didn't quite exist, right? EY, we just announced a partnership with NSBE, which is close and dear to my heart as a lifetime member. So I think you're starting to see a lot of those on how do we really create that level of equality and inclusivity that doesn't exist currently. And so, the question then becomes, which I'm always pressing on, is how are we going to drive metrics, behaviors that continue to push the envelope in that direction? Because having a broad brushed, and I'm sure probably my peers on this panel as well could probably attest to, it's like we lump these D&I efforts into one bucket and we don't unpeel. When we say we're doing great on our scorecard and we don't double click, I call it the watermelon metric, right? Everything looks great on the outside, but it's really hot red on the inside. And so I would push us to start creating some of those types of metrics. And again, I don't know what my other colleagues are doing, but we've started to implement things like when you look to staff a project, what does the diversity of your delivery team start to look like? Because guess what? You can't have that upward mobility if people don't have the experience. It's all tied together. And so we go through a very stringent process of making sure not only hiring practices, but that folks do get that experience that will help them level up. So I would also, this is a global issue, and certainly one that permeates all of the corporations. So I'd please ask the other panelists to weigh in here, because I'd love to also hear what you guys are doing.
Marge, I think, Marjan, I think I'll chime in a little bit, Tar, here. It's also something that we're hearing from the candidates who are interested in roles in our companies.
No doubt.
Interviewing is a two-way street. So if you're going to bring the best and brightest minds, and they look at, somebody from a marginalized background comes into interview and sees a panel that doesn't represent what they look like,
Exactly.
the question becomes, hey, what does this company really mean for me?
Yeah.
And so they're interviewing us as well, right? They're looking at us and saying, what can you do to attract me to join your company? What's your management staff look like? What do your ranks look like, right? It extends even to our customer base.
100%.
We're selling to our customer base, but we don't understand our customer base's interests because we don't look like our customer base. So how does that reflect even in the way we can approach them? Organon, for example, one of our key focus areas is women's health. And when you look at women's health and whether it's reproduction or fertility, they're key areas where, based on marginalized populations, there are different types of attributes that apply to the various demographies around the world, not just in the US. So do we really understand them if we don't have people who can express what they feel and what they go through every day? So these are things that, it only helps, even going back to the economic point, makes a huge difference in the bottom line, right?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I know years ago, I don't know if there has been a refresh on this, but I'll have to dig it up. There is a gentleman by the name of Ted Childs who led HR and D&I for IBM years ago, put quantitative metrics behind everything you just talked through, right? Because we can talk about it, but sometimes when you get to those quantitative metrics, all of a sudden it becomes like an, oh, wow, movement to action type of notion. And so I definitely would recommend us getting our hands on that. Because it's not that I think a lot of people want to do the right thing, but once you start seeing the business case, if you will, behind it, it becomes a huge motivator. And so I'd even love the students to have that in their back pocket for some of their interviews as they look at corporate candidates.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marjan and Tirbalam, for this discussion. So this next question is from Sabrina Mirza, and it goes, what should I, as a young professional, look for in a company that will let me know the company's commitment to intentional allyship? Is it serious and sustainable and not fleeting? And I will pass this on to Bryony.
So young professionals, we have so much access these days to information. Utilize it. Do your research. Look at the company's website. Look at articles. Look at social media. What is that company expressing? Are they using inclusive language? What are they talking about on their platforms? And is it showing that they are actually, being an intentional ally? And is their actions consistent? I would say, many companies in the past year, with the, climate of Black Lives Matters and things of that nature, many companies made promises on that platform. Look and see, and use what's available to you of whether or not they're actually committing to those actions. Has it come to fruition? Have they made any traction? So there's a lot of resources out there where you can look into a company and see whether or not they're actually practicing what they preach, that they're not just talking the talk, but they're actually walking it. And I think that's really important as you look into a company and you do research on them, as well as, going back to what Marjan was saying about metrics. Some companies are being transparent about their metrics, and you can utilize that to gain insight even further into a company. Looking at, how were their metrics before? How are they doing now? Are they making progress? And taking it from that standpoint. Another way of looking at it is supplier diversity programs. That's been a big push lately. And that shows whether a company is taking the initiative and the step to make an effort to work with a diverse company and have them have a seat at the table, essentially. So those are some of the ways that a young professional can, gauge whether a company is being serious about their intentional allyship. Do any of my colleagues, I guess, have anything further maybe to add?
Yeah, I fully agree, Brittany, what you said. And, I have an 8-year-old. With kids, you always encouraging them, don't worry about the outcome. It's the process that's important in what you do. But I think in this case, the outcome is actually really important, right? Because that's the only way to measure. First of all, are you doing the right thing? And secondly, are you creating the environment to allow people to do the right thing? And in the end of the day, you get the results you want. So I think having what we've just discussed about holding folks accountable, holding companies, leaders in the companies accountable, have quantitative metrics, eventually tied to how the leaders are measured. At BCG, we have a set of quantitative metrics. Every year for partners like myself, I get a report that throughout the year for all the projects that I work on, what is the composition of DNI, team members on my team. It's taken into consideration at the end of my assessment, right, by our leadership. Also, there are surveys, again, going back to the entire organization for everybody who's worked with me over the course of a year. And there's a specific category. It's not buried anywhere in the major categories of value creation and blah, blah, blah. It's a specific category bolded and say, what do you feel about Lou's performance in terms of diversity and inclusion? So it's just there, that's the only way to make it work, because otherwise if you're not held accountable, nobody's going to do it.
No, exactly. And to piggyback off of what Lou is saying in regards to surveys, there's, the internal surveys as well as external surveys. And another way to look at a company and see how have they progressed is, have they won any awards, in relation to DE&I or in support of, best, company to work for this type of marginalized group. Or so those are different ways that you can see what kind of progress a company is making.
Thank you so much, Bryony and Lou. Okay, so for our last question, this is coming from Lauren from Rutgers, and her question is, what is the first steps to commence intentional allyship? And I'll pass this on to Tarbilam.
Thank you, Lauren, for the question. There are probably, I'd say maybe five suggestions I can make to this. And I hesitate to provide them because my guess is most of the folks on here are part of a marginalized group. So I'm kind of preaching to a choir, so to say. So I'll provide something as well for us, me being part of that group too. But, if you think about it broadly speaking, I think the first is understanding privilege. Generally speaking, and we've seen some data on this, most people don't know that they're privileged. Most people in the in-group, let me put it that way, they don't know that they're privileged. They think about privilege from a perspective of having wealth or being wealthy, where honestly, that's not what the case is. So the first thing is really understanding what privilege means and what not being privileged then ultimately means for the marginalized groups or the out groups, as was said earlier. I think having that understanding begins to open the door for people to think differently about allyship. And folks can Google what that is. It's so easy to understand, what that is. The second is stopping and listening. And these are extremely practical steps, right? So this is nothing that you need to go do some research to be able to do, but stop and listen and make sure that everybody's voice is heard properly, and when you listen actively versus having, kind of a response built in without really hearing what the other person is saying, you then begin to understand why a specific thing And the third I mentioned in passing is ensuring if you are in a meeting and you feel that only certain people spoke up, feel free to jump in and ask the moderator what other people think, or nudge the moderator. In the virtual space, you can send them a private message to say, hey, we haven't heard from XYZ voices. Can you encourage them to contribute? Because we're all here for the betterment of a company. The fourth I'd say is be a change agent. You know, I think it's in New York City, in the subway, they say, if you see something, say something. In this case as well, if you see something or hear something, interrupt, especially if somebody from a marginalized group is not there, but they're actively speaking about them behind their backs. You know, jump in and say, you know, that's not proper, and provide some counsel or guidance as to why, you know, you believe that, and help the in-group really understand the other perspective, right? I'd say thrive together by taking action. Some of that action could be as small as, you know, you go through your recruiting process. If you're brand new in the company, you get the job, you provide feedback on the recruiting. You know, I noticed through the recruiting process that there was nobody who looked like XYZ, like me, on the panel. What are your practices about some of these things? Those simple questions, even at that level, which is let's say an entry-level job, might prompt the company to begin to take action. And that's, again, for you in the marginalized group, right? The other could be, I'd say, lift others. So now this is where you've gone through your career, made it to a certain degree, and you're in that room. Your ally has helped you get to that room and you're sitting at the table. What are you doing to pull others up? What are you doing to look back and say, hey, how can I ensure that we continue to be inclusive? We continue to help each other rise. What am I going to do to make sure that, you know, this is no longer just an in-out group per se, but more of a level playing field where everybody truly has equal access to opportunities. So take that position and do something with it, right? Those are some of the suggestions I can make for intentional allyship. I welcome the rest of the panel to chime in as well. I'm certain there's other things that you could do.
Thank you so much, Charvelin. So I see Raki has joined us. So I will, hi Raki. So, well, this has been an amazing discussion. And unfortunately, we're kind of like running out of time. So I would like to thank, yeah.
Yeah, I don't cut me off. I have a very major announcement. So I'll let you finish and then I'll jump in.
Okay, so yeah, I would like to thank our panelists, Marjon Dean, Lo Cheng, Bryony Walker, and Tarbilan Lafon, as well as the students for engaging in this discussion.
Thank you as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrea. Such a great session. Again, like I can't thank you enough, and I echo Andrea's comments that she just made, right? So we really appreciate your passion and your commitment to diversity and inclusion, and actually helping, you know, our younger generation and young professionals or students who are actually coming out of school, and giving them some tips and ideas, right? Because I remember going back to my days when I was a student, I really did not have this kind of mentorship, this coaching, and I wish I had it at that time, right? So it just gives me much more of a drive to actually do something about this in this space. So when I see, you know, leaders like yourself coming forward and sharing your insights, your expertise, it just makes me very happy. And I'm sure it adds a lot of value to most of us, if not everyone here. I'm sure everyone is not a student, but we can always use these tips in our daily life, right? So thank you. Everything you, all of you mentioned resonated with me. Like I could point my fingers everywhere in the comments that, hey, you know, this is so true, so relevant. So again, you know, thank you again for your time. We really appreciate it. But like I said, I also have a big announcement to make. We have 2 raffle winners from so far of the session. And the names are, if you are here listening, Emily Ryle and Mark Madriaga. So congratulations, Emily and Mark. Please contact Discover office so we can give you directions on how to claim your prize, which is very generously offered by and sponsored by Hershey's, the sweetest company on earth. So it's a Hershey's gift basket. So please do, if you're listening, please do call. We'll send you a notification email as well. And you can contact the office to claim your prize. So with that, I think we are ready at time to close the call, and we will meet in the next session, which is the energy break, and which is also sponsored by Hershey's, and we'll have a health and wellness officer coming in and helping us stretch and do some office exercises so that we can get more energized after this wonderful, wonderful session. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.